Good evening. Tonight, we will be discussing, amongst other things, including an unexpected event, and that is, of course, the war in the Persian Gulf. And I think that this evening, and what we're going to discuss, is very appropriate. So rather than it merely being a session of information, which usually these evening sessions, although I haven't done one in about 7 months, and for whatever reason, it was decided that we would do one the night, a week after the war broke out. And I think it's important that while I had given this lecture many times years ago, I think it now takes on another dimension, only because it's important that we understand where victory and where right over wrong and good over evil stems from. This month is called the month of Aquarius by astrologers. By Avram Avinu, it is known as the month of Shevat. That's the Hebrew name for this month, Shevat. And also the constellation that rules over this month. The constellation is called Dali, and many have attributed the idea of Dali, which means a pitcher. In Hebrew, it's more closely connected with the idea of a bucket, not a pitcher. And the bucket, or the pitcher, and we'll see that there is a strong distinction between the two, because in Hebrew, if you study the Hebrew words carefully, you will see that Dali means a bucket, and we're going to treat it that way, and that's the way they treat it in Israel. And when they discuss the word kad in Hebrew, it means pitcher, although these definitions or these words are used interchangeably in translations, as we will shortly notice when it comes to translating certain section of the Torah. And we'll see that a clear understanding of these two significant words, which apply to this month, is not readily known. So we have the month called Shevat. We have the month also called Dali, which means Aquarius, or in Hebrew, Mashiach. And also, somehow, the picture in the constellation, that's where the idea came from, because if you look up into the heavens with a telescope, you will notice that picture that's always observable in the form of a man bending down with a pitcher and pouring water. That's the way the constellation appears. From a Kabbalistic point of view, these different ideas have, of course, significance, because we're not dealing with symbols as such, but rather their internal meaning and what they signify for us. The planet that rules over Aquarius now has become subject to dispute, whereas from a Kabbalistic point of view, this month of Shevat, or the month of Aquarius, is ruled by Shabtai, Saturn. And now it's come into question, maybe one of the other 3 newly found, discovered planets rule over them. But we will we will understand that the old tradition, and of course the Kabbalistic tradition, is that Shabtai rules over this month. So those are basically the ideas on a very superficial level surrounding this particular month. Now, where do we find the words of Deli in the Torah and Shevat in the Torah? Because we understand, and all of you I'm sure present here understand, that when we are discussing the Torah, we have gone away from the established tradition and returned. I should say when we've gone away, meaning we've returned to the tradition that has been with us over 2,000 years, and that is that the whole of the Torah, meaning the 5 books of Moses and all of the prophets, all are merely a cosmic code. In other words, nothing that is written in its formal description has any meaning according to the Zohar. Now, how did this idea come about of translating the Torah and reading into the stories as they appear? We might say because there was a lapse from the time the Torah was written, which is about close to 2,000 years ago, and when it was again rediscovered in Spain in the end of the 13th century by Moses de Leon. So there was enough time there, a span of almost 1,300 years, whereby different ideas concerning the Torah arose. But we here understand that we can never translate any portion of the Torah and think that we have from that translation arrived at the significance or meaning of the Torah. So we go to the Torah, which will reveal for us many things. And it says the following in chapter 24 of Balak, verse 7. I will first read the Hebrew. Yizal mayim midalyav, and water shall flow. In fact, they say here from his branches. You can imagine what kind of a translation that is. Midalyav, but actually the word is Deli. Deli, from his bucket. Okay. V'zaro b'mayim rabim, and his seed shall be in many waters. And vayorom me'agag malko, and the king shall be higher than Agag, v'tinasei malchuto, and his kingdom shall be exalted. Immediately, and that's why I say this this particular evening is hopefully going to be very significant. And I think at the end you'll understand just what I meant when I said this particular evening, because of its interpretation of what this month is about. We immediately notice the word v'tinasei malchuto. And if you recall, I said that Tafshin Nun Aleph could mean tisna, could mean to hate, which we see a great deal of it coming forth this year, and we're still only in the beginning of the year. And we said at the same time, it could be v'tinaseh, and it could be an exalted year. In other words, we know each year, for those we hear in Kabbalah, we know that when the sages designated a particular year with a name, Tafshin Nun Aleph or whatever, they were immediately providing us with a preview of the entire year, a preview, to understand what we can expect from this year. Just as last year was Tafshin Nun, we knew that this would be Shana. This would be the year. The year. And it was the year. A year that, for the past 2,000 years, we have never experienced the overthrow of governments without war. It has never happened in 2,000 years. It was a very significant year. But as privileged as we were and as joyous as we were about the events, now 1 year later, everything turns around. Now, they don't know what to do. I mean, these same countries that have experienced this joyous occasion now find themselves in trouble, without mentioning all of the countries that underwent this miraculous change in their government. But this year is V'tinasei Malchuto. And his kingdom shall be exalted. What do you mean exalted? Well, we said, like Vahi ben Soharon. We raise up, also meaning exalted. But what does that mean, exalted? What does it mean his kingdom will be exalted? Now also, in this one verse, it says that his kingdom, meaning Malchut, meaning our world, shall rise above Agag. Now, Agag has always been associated with Gog and Magog, and when the king that was fighting against Shaul, his name was Agag. But we know that the word Agag means mind. Mind. In other words, when we see warfare in the Torah, or the warfare with Shaul, these are, as I've already mentioned in many of the publications, Agag refers to mind warfare. Mind warfare. In other words, the victor or the vanquished will depend, says this verse, on who will be stronger in mind. Well, that's not very clear. What do you mean stronger in mind? Does it mean that one who is, we find that in our daily life. A person who is strong-minded usually will succeed as opposed to an individual who is weak-minded. But is that all that the Torah wants to teach us here? But in any event, we have, getting back to the first idea, where did Dali appear in the Torah? It says here, Midalyav, and we find this word, the waters shall flow from its bucket. So already we have an indication that we're talking about water and we're talking about a bucket. What is this referring to? Well, if we look through this section of the Torah, we will notice that we are discussing Mashiach. This particular section is discussing Mashiach. If you will recall that Bilam came at the behest of Balak to curse the Jew. And what happened when he came and he found the Jews? In place of cursing, he praised them. And we have that prayer. Ma tovo olech Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. It is the prayer that is recited as soon as anyone enters the Bet HaKnesset, the synagogue. And he recites that very prayer that Bilam, coming to curse the Jews, recited. And we have learned from the commentators that his words, and cursing again, he was not coming to defeat the Jew by might or force, but rather through metaphysical means. And so these same words, as the Torah says, I'm not going through the entire section, but But Balak says, I told you to come and curse, and out of your words came praise. In the same section, and that is the way we know that this whole section is not only referring to a particular battle, because, again, we learn from the Zohar that the significance of this section is not to teach us or to be joyous, because along came one of the enemies of Israel, and he was defeated, and therefore we're joyous. No, it is coming to teach us. It is coming to teach us how one becomes victorious over evil. In other words, Bilam is portrayed as evil consciousness, whatever form that may take, whatever form it may take. Then we go on to, in the same section, in verse 17. Again, almost no meaning. It says, Erenu v'lo ata, I see him, but not now. Ashurenu v'lo karov, I perceive him, but he's not near. Darach kochav miyakov. Here, there's a great disagreement between many of the commentators. What does it mean, darach kochav miyakov? Now, the word darach also means to step. There shall step forth. I'm just translating it for the present. A kochav, a star, miyakov, v'kam shevet miyisrael, and there shall rise. Now, shevet means a tribe, but shevet also means a rod, and they say there shall rise up a scepter from Israel, and machatz patei Moav karkal kol bnei Shet, and it'll strike down and break down all of the enemies, that will ever come about in this world, all of the evil people. Meanwhile, we have answered the question, where do these words come from? So they do come from a particular section. Now, Dali is spelled Daled Lamed Yud. Daled Lamed Yud. That word Dali also means poor. In other words, the reason we're delving into these names, because again, as we have learned in Kabbalah, we are not here to learn what the baby's name is. In other words, what would have happened if they called this month Candy? That means we would call it Candy. But someone somewhere decided to call it Dali, or call it the month of Aquarius, or call it February. So they just had to give it a name, because you've got to give the baby some name. And we know that is not true, because every time a name has been designated, the idea is that name is coded to provide us with a quanta of information concerning that particular object that received that particular name. The same way we say as when people receive names. It's not merely a question of designating a name. You give a name, a person at the Brit, or for a girl in the Bet HaKnesset, you give a name. Well, is that because we just want to give a name? No. We say that the reason we designate a name is because the name should connect with the internal soul of the individual. That soul is called by that name. If someone has the wrong name, he's going to have a problem. Why? Because externally he's called by one name, and yet when people are addressing him, his name is really something else, because the name stems not from the soul. It does not stem from because his grandfather was called so-and-so or his brother was called so-and-so, etc. It is essential that we find we try to locate the name of the soul. Then the person will be connected to his internal being. Same thing here. Same thing here. It's important, and it's a prerequisite, that we must determine the significance and meaning behind these names, because if we do not know their significance, if we do not know their internal meaning, then we have made no connection, and therefore, the old rule, we cannot rule. The same way as if someone has been given the wrong name, that means there is no way that that person can rule, because he has no connection with the soul. And what is the most important aspect of a person? His body or his soul? Obviously his soul. All right? Dali also, and we use, just like physicists make use of mathematics, we also make use of mathematics. We have a Hebrew word for it. It is called gematria. But gematria also is not just a game. Gematria, or mathematics, is there to provide us with a system by which I could understand, again, the significance, the internal meaning, what really is going on. It's like we say, we want to know what's going on in the head of, let's say, Saddam Hussein. You want to know what's going on in his head. I mean, not always can we tell from external behavior what is going on inside. The numerical value of Dali is 44. Now, if it has that connotation, then we also know that it is equal to the significant 44. Daled Lamed Yud numerically adds up to 44, and the other word that equals 44 is dam, blood. Somewhere along the line, these two are connected, but immediately it tells us that this month somehow is connected with blood. Now, we can associate blood as meaning bloodshed, and we can also interpret blood as the soul, the lifeblood of the human being. Without blood, we cannot exist. Blood is the system of our body. Without blood, there is no system. There is no body. The word Shevat, again, has a numerical value of 311. What does that mean? 311. 311 also is equivalent to another important word. Not to be chauvinistic, but it means Ish, Aleph Yud Shin, which means man. Man. Ish. Now we shall shortly learn from other references that wherever the word Ish is mentioned, it refers to the idea of Mashiach. Therefore, immediately we have the idea that Shvat, this month, and that's where the idea came, that is the month of Aquarius. Why is it called the month of Aquarius? Conventional astrology says that's a tradition. But since in Kabbalah there is no such thing as tradition, because tradition, as it was handed down from generation to generation, could have been corrupted, could have been misinterpreted. Now you're talking about tradition. Once it's tradition, that's what happens. Many people fall into different traditions. Take Jews. How many traditions are there in Jews? Almost as many Jews as there are. That's how many traditions you have. Everyone remembers his own tradition. So how do you get at the truth? How do you arrive at the truth? Therefore, when we say this month is Mashiach, we say because Shvat, that's the code name. Why did they give it that name Shvat? Because they were indicating Mashiach. And we will learn how Shvat indicates Mashiach, and therefore when this pasuk in Balak, this verse in Balak which says, Kam Shevet mi Yisrael, and he's talking about Mashiach there, this whole section is talking about that, and it means when that man, meaning Mashiach, will arise from Israel, and then, as the Zohar says, all of the evil nations shall be smitten. All of the evil nations shall be smitten. So, at least we have a basis for understanding why this is called the month of Mashiach. Now, before we go to the Zohar, which of course makes our connection, another indication that the word Dali has to do with the idea of Mashiach. It says, hang in Isaiah, Yeshaya. It says, go in chapter 40, verse 15. Ein goyim kamar midli, ushachat moznayim nechshavu, ein iyim kadak yitol. Here again, it says, behold, the nations will be as a drop in the bucket, meaning, and he's talking about the evil nations, etc., and they will become no more. Again, discussing that the idea, why does he have to bring in the word midli? In fact, it's in the English, it's translated as bucket, which is incorrect. I'm sorry, here it's correct. Midli here is correct. That's right. But as you know, the Aquarian sign is always with a pitcher. Because it is a pitcher. It is a pitcher. You know the difference between a bucket and a pitcher. A pitcher usually has a handle, and you pour from a pitcher. From a bucket, you wash the floors with a bucket, many other things. But a bucket is not a pitcher. There's a strong distinction. Another piece of information that is necessary to understand the significance of this month is called Dali. But in the constellation, God, or the life force, put the picture there as a pitcher. Why is a pitcher? Again, to indicate to us what Mashiach means. What Mashiach means. Kad is 24. Now, 24 appears many times in the Torah. 24. What's so significant about 24? Kaf and Dalet. 24. Again, codes that will, in the overall picture of what we'd like to arrive at, provides us with, again, a picture. Kad, in right here in this section of Balak, at the end, it says when Pinchas slew the two people that he did. I don't want to go into that, but again, that is also in chapter 25, and it says at the end, "Vayu hametim b'magefa," and how many Jews died in this plague? Died by the plague? There was a plague. Arba ve'esrim elef. There were 24,000. If you also remember, at the time of Rabbi Akiva, how many students does the Talmud say were destroyed by Roman inhumanity? 24,000. Again, not 23, not 28. 24. 24. 24, says the Zohar, is to indicate that wherever you find the word kad, you are referring to something of a blood nature, death, plague, etc. Okay? So we have the pitcher, we have water, and we have the name called Dali, which usually relates to Mashiach. Now, that's easy for us to say that it relates to Mashiach because we said the name Shvat means Ish. But that wouldn't be sufficient. That wouldn't be sufficient. We would have to go somewhere to find out why a bucket would mean Mashiach. And therefore, we turn to the Zohar in Vayikra, because it is the only way that we could know what it means. How else can one know the internal significance of anything? It's like how can I know a person before I see his behavior? The answer is, for most people, we don't know. But what does Kabbalah say? We'll teach you how you can just look at the person's configuration, see how his lines are, see how the hair grows. We can tell externally how a person is internally. If all this is what Kabbalah is about. It is to provide us with the unseen forces. Because who is a person? If he's handsome, does that mean he's good? If he's ugly looking, does that mean he's evil? Of course not. So how can one arrive at the internal things, internal natures of things? The answer is, that is what the purpose of Kabbalah is about. All right? Now, in Pashat Vayikra of the Zohar, he's speaking of many angels. And he brings down this sentence that we just quoted, Yizal mayin midalyav. If you recall, that's the verse. And he shall flow water from his bucket. Says the Zohar, and only the Zohar says that. Ki habina hi dalyav. Binah, as we know, is a code name, but we use that code name. It means freedom. Binah conscious. When you achieve Binah, that's the whole idea of Yom Kippur. It's not simply a holiday of fasting and repentance. Now, is the purpose repentance? Is the purpose fasting? Or is there a higher purpose? Is the fasting, is the praying, and everything else that is connected with Yom Kippur the objective? Or are they merely paths by which we can achieve something of another nature? Says the Zohar, everything that we do on any holiday, including Yom Kippur, is only a system, is only a method by which we achieve freedom, which is Yom Kippur. That day cosmically has been arranged that if you do this, that, and the other thing, you have a chance of achieving freedom. That is called Binah, Yovel. It is freedom. And for us, the Zohar says, wherever the word bucket, which means has no significance in the story, it could say kad, it could say anything. You could even pour water from a glass. Why does it have to say bucket? Why can't it say pitcher? But because this month was designated Shvat, and the constellation is Dali, to indicate to us that we are discussing the month of Mashiach. So this is the background and all of the terminologies, whether it's conventional astrology or Kabbalistic astrology, at least we have come to the knowledge of what this month is about. Now, to follow through with the other Zohar that is consistent throughout, is that if you do not understand the inner significance of this month, as we have just explained, in other words, if we have not deciphered the codes concerning this month, what were the codes? The names, Shvat, Dli, Kad, etc., then we could never arrive at a control over the constellation. We can only be ruled by the constellation, but we could never overrule, never overcome what this month has in store for us. And it is not by chance, that, of course, we can say, well, since the 15th of January was designated as the final cutoff point for Saddam Hussein. But who decided on that day? In fact, there was discussions. There were disagreements. And you all know that the 15th was, of course, Rosh Chodesh. Did that have significance? Well, who decided? We know that we decide very little. And therefore, it was decided in this month. If it was decided in this month, immediately that should have been a clue, as it was for me at least, that it was a clue that this month, and if we don't have the consciousness, then we will not succeed, but I hope tonight we will succeed. Because, as I said when I first began this evening's lecture, that this is more than just sharing information. I'm hoping that we achieve a certain consciousness and that we will do something about it this evening, rather than just, it was hopefully a beautiful or a wonderful and enlightening lecture, and we all go home with a little more knowledge. Because that's only information. Tonight I hope we will make use of that knowledge. But in any event, we see from this Zohar that Yizal mayin midalyav, quoting that supposedly insignificant verse in Balak, which deals with Mashiach, that Dali, this word, means Binah consciousness, which means freedom. Okay? We also know that this month of Mashiach shows that picture called Kad. And I said, I brought two examples of what Kad means, what the picture means. So the picture for us now means destruction. The word Kad signifies destruction. Now, when the verse said, Darach, Kochav Yaakov, you remember? Darach Kochav Me'Yaakov, there shall step forth a star out of Jacob. It has absolutely no meaning. Absolutely no meaning. Because stepping is walking. But, also says the Zohar, there's a code there. If you notice, in the word darach, you have the word kad as well. You have the word kad. Again, that idea of a picture. Kad resh. Again, only to indicate to us what this month is. And in fact, not only what this month is, we'll shortly learn, does it mean Mashiach comes this month? I mean, it's called the month of Mashiach. Does it mean this is the day Mashiach is born? We know that's not true. We know Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. So it's not referring to his birthday or to his birth. Is it talking about the months that the world will be redeemed or the world will be freed? We know that's not true. We know that there's a disagreement of whether the freedom will take place in the sun, in the month of Aries, or will it take place in the month of Iyar, the month of Libra? But no one.
Taurus. Not Libra.
Tishrei. Oh, not Tishrei.
I said Iyar.
Did I say Iyar?
Yeah.
Can't even imagine how. I say Iyar. No. No, absolutely. But I think because I was looking at Michelle. Look at the influence he has on me. I think that must have been it. It wasn't even in the computer.
Something to look forward for Iyar.
Okay. Iyar is the 24,000, the death of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva. But I was referring to Tishrei, but not in this month. So why is it referred to as the month of Mashiach? But in any event, Darach Kochav Miyakov, Kad Resh, and we know the letter Resh stands for poorness, subjection, and so on. So what the Zohar says is when the star of dejection goes out from Yaakov, meaning it's bad times, v'kam shevet mi Yisrael, then the Mashiach shall rise up from Israel. Shevet, remember Shvat, Shevet, Ish will rise up. So the word Darach Kochav Yaakov, again, all here is teaching us what Mashiach is about. But it's another matter, how do we achieve Mashiach? All right? Now, one other verse that I want to, two other verses that I want to quote, and that is in Zechariah. And it's talking about Zechariah, who is a prophet. And it says like this, Biyom Esrim Va'arba, in the 24th day, La'ashtei Asar Chodesh, Hu Chodesh Shvat, the 11th month, if you count from Nisan, because Nisan is for us the first month. Tishrei, as you know, is the 7th month. It is not the beginning of the new year, meaning as such, because it is referred to as the 7th month. Why we say Shana Tova is another matter which we have discussed on the subject of Rosh Hashanah. But the months begin with Aries, with Nisan, and therefore Shvat is called the 11th month. And it says that Zechariah is discussing his prophecy. When did this prophecy take place? That are described in his book? It says on the 24th day in the 11th month. Now you think it's important? And what would have happened if Zechariah didn't tell us the day that he was presenting his prophecy? I mean, would it bother anybody here in this Bet Knesset? No. So what was the significance? Zohar asked the same question. What is the significance? Not only that, but he's got to add also about the second year of Darius. I mean, a nice Persian king, but I mean, what do I have to know about him? Just tell us what the prophecy is about. I mean, why does he have to go to such lengths to give us the month, the day, and when Darius was ruling? And then he goes on to say, this was the word of God to Zechariah ben Berachia, so the prophet. And then he goes on to say, and he says, of course, he's discussing about Mashiach, and that's why he brought in Darius, because it was Darius and that family that also gave us the beginning of the temple. Says the Zohar again, to indicate to us that Shvat, this month, the month of Mashiach, also will be the month of Kad. That's why it tells us the 24th day. We have already discussed the significance of 24. Kavdalet, 24. It means Kad. Again, to indicate to us, as the Zohar spells it out very clearly, that, and we will read that Zohar, that when the Mashiach makes its appearance, or his appearance, there will be a significant amount of bloodshed. That's why Zechariah, when he was discussing his prophecy concerning the Galut, concerning the time of Mashiach, Geula, he also wanted to forewarn us, to tell us, remember, that this month of Shvat is Kad. This month of Shvat means a time of blood, of bloodshed, as it has been indicated in the Torah. Just that we had another indication. Now, getting back to the Pasuk, Darach Kochav Miyakov, a star. What does the stars have, or what is the significance of the stars, and why is there so much emphasis placed in this one sentence? Because you remember we said, I see him velo ata, but not now. What did it mean? And so the Zohar in Pashat Balak again indicates to us what that verse means, because superficially it has no meaning. Ubilam k'shiyigi eleihem, when he came to the Jews, hodia lehem adava sherotzeh mehem, v'sagar atzmo imahem bahalim. Before he came to curse the Jews, he did his thing. He did his thing because he was coming to curse chas v'shalom, and that meant that he had to draw energy from somewhere, in order that he would be able to bikesh lekatregal Yisrael, leheshiv otam leMisraim. And his idea was to return them not to the country of Mitzrayim, but to return them to slavery. What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what did the light force do, or what did God do? Bilbeil v'kilkel kol hachachmot sheba'olam, v'lo yochlu lekarev eleihem lYisrael. Bilbul. If you remember, and if we have this consciousness, and if we consider and think like that, I hope we shall see not what will be defined as a miracle, but that we will learn not to be so stunned by that miracle, but we shall realize, and maybe the whole world, where the action really is taking place. If you remember Migdal Bavel, and those Jews, when the people of the world at that time wanted to make the Tower of Babel, if you remember, and they wanted to rule over the whole world, You remember what happened, and why could they rule over the whole world? Because it says Vayikra la'aretz safa echat, because at that time they only had one language, and the Zohar says, what language was it? It was Hebrew, the Hebrew language. The whole world spoke Hebrew. The whole world. Then it says, Udvarim achadim. Well, they translate one language and one speech. Well, isn't one language one speech? Isn't one speech one language? Says the Zohar, what does it mean, Udvarim achadim? That although their purpose and intent was evil, God could do nothing about this situation. He was powerless, says the light force was powerless. Why was it powerless? Because it was advarim achadim. They were all unified. They all considered each and every single one of this group of of the world people as to accomplish their task, they would have to be unified. Can you imagine that? To accomplish their task, they had to be unified. And God had no way to disrupt their intentions and their goals, which was to enslave the whole world eternally, they thought. And what did God do? What could God do? He couldn't destroy these people, couldn't punish these people for all of their evil intents. What did he do? He had only one choice. He had only one choice. Since they had one language, right? Since they had only one language, it says, since they had one language, I'm actually reading, he brought them into a condition that they balal Hashem sefat kol haaretz. He made it so that they could not communicate with each other as one language. And from there, in fact, it says in the Zohar, all of the languages of the world emerge. What he did was put a speech consciousness into, and a different language into the people. There were now 70 languages. It means they couldn't connect with each other. And this was the only way that God could bring a halt to their evilness. And he says, Kisham balal Hashem, sfat kol haaretz, and from there, they were all scattered. Aken kara shema Bavel. Therefore, it's called Bavel. Bavel, as you know, is Babylonia or Iraq today. So when I saw again this Zohar, and you recall, and it tells us how did God avert this tragedy? Because as you know, it says there will never arise a prophet as Moses. But it says where? Amongst the Israelites. But there shall arise a prophet on an equal level as Moses amongst other nations. And who will that be? Bilam, the individual we're talking about. So you understand that we are not speaking of someone who deals with witchcraft and sorcery, but someone who is literally, and was literally on the same level, on that same level as Moshe, but except from the evil side. And therefore, says the Zohar, all he could do, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bilbel, he could only do the same thing. The only thing he could do, God, to prevent Bilam from carrying out his evil intentions, was to be Mevalvel. Take away his communication with the evil forces that were present. Therefore, when I was thinking, when they decided to attack him, I said, how do you get rid of this man without bloodshed? How do you accomplish that kind of thing? How could we destroy him without bloodshed? I said, but wait a second. Last year, there were revolutions in countries. It was without bloodshed. To overthrow a government like Russia without a shot being fired. I mean, who would have dreamt one day before it happened that it would ever happen? We have been preparing 50 years for the inevitable day where we would have to fight him. That has been going on since the end of World War II. And something happened. Bilbul. I mean, whatever this guy Gorbachev thought, But it resulted in what? Things happening without the firing of a shot. So I said to myself, how do we get rid of this fellow? I said, you go back to the Torah. You go back to the Torah. And if the Torah says that just as then, when we ask the question, now this is the question we always ask, because that's the only way you can understand the secrets of the Torah, because it's a code. How come this advanced nation that was going to build a skyscraper maybe 3,000 stories high, maybe 5,000 stories high, this was going straight up to the heavens. Today they can't put up a building more than 150 stories high. Engineering-wise, the ability and capability is just not there. The technology is not there. We're talking about an advanced civilization going back almost 4,000 years ago, maybe more. And they had this technology. Therefore, our question is, how come they were located in Bavel, what is known today as Iraq? Why there? Why not somewhere else? It's a question that we must ask, because that's the Kabbalistic method. You never leave anything to, that's the way it is. That's left for physics, and that's why they're dead. Because where they always said, what is? Rather than question, why is it? So we see again that what happened then, and the only way is because Bavel is an energy center contrary to Israel, whereas Israel is the energy center for positive energy, and the Bet HaMikdash was built there because it would act as a channel and antenna for that internal energy that no one can see. The same thing was Bavel. It has, and it still has, not to the extent that it did, but it still has that capability, and therefore, this one man, where all logic defies his logic, that why would he stand up to the entire world? It has never happened. It has never happened. The Torah tells us there were 4 countries against 5 countries, even when it discusses war. It is never the control. Even David, he went to war for a little country. He didn't go to capture the whole world. This man stands up against the whole world because he comes from Bavel. And therefore, what we conclude from that is that the only way, not only to defeat him, but to defeat any nation or any human being that can be classified, where there is a unanimous consensus that this thing or this person is evil, is only by destroying his connection. As the Zohar says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu bilbel v'kilkel, and destroyed kol hachachmot sheba'olam, all of his connections with the wisdom, with the power of the world. And there's a power out there. That's how this one man doesn't care about the whole world. He's standing up, like Bilam. Wasn't Bilam a smart person? The Torah says, or the Zohar says, it says, Lo kam navi b'Yisrael kemo Moshe. In Israel, but not Bilam, he was just like Moshe. Wasn't he an intelligent person? Didn't he know he's coming against God? But he knew there was another side. Because we're not talking about God. We are talking about the Tetragrammaton, which is the channel. That's God to us. God, who God is, we have no idea, neither shall we ever know who God is. We can only, as Rabbi Ashok says in the beginning of his study of the 10 Luminous Emanations, that we can only discuss the light of God, the light force of God. Now, balancing the light force of God, there is the dark force of God. These are the two powers that rule this world. They are not powers that we can observe. They become manifested in Migdal Bavel, Bilam, etc., etc. And therefore, when the Torah says, and talking about how do you raise up the kingdom of justice, the kingdom of righteousness, on who? On Agag. This cannot be done by force. This cannot be done by force. The Torah is telling us immediately. Now we are so brilliant that we still think after 2,000 years at least that war ends all wars. And it has never yet happened. It can only come through the mind. What does it mean by the mind? What does it mean by the mind? The same way as Bilam and the people from Bavel connected with the other side, and that gave them the strength to rule over the whole world, so must the other side, the light side, draw upon that energy, the light force, in order that we can overcome the dark force. There's only one way. One way. We must, through whatever meditation, we're going to discuss that tonight, because it's very urgent, it's important for all of the ramifications. If there should be bloodshed, it'll be catastrophic in more ways than we can even imagine. Is to, and only one way, is to sever that tie of Saddam Hussein and his group with that force that exists in that country called Iraq. And the only way we can do that is by being mevalveil him. Mevalveil, meaning disrupting his communication.